After all those weeks of silence, the transfer window is definitely at full swing for Newcastle United, and I'm back with a bonus episode on Tuesday to discuss the latest with Hugo Ekitike and Alexander Isak, with a lot of moving parts between Newcastle United and Liverpool this afternoon. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm sure you weren't expecting a second show on Tuesday, but so much has happened since the first one was recorded this morning. I'm back on to do another one because so much has changed. Basically, for this morning, we did a huge Hugo Ekitike special, with Newcastle United making a bid for him, £70 million, which was apparently rejected this afternoon. There's been lots of talk about other bids as well and whether Newcastle will go back in. But also now Liverpool have entered the fray to challenge Newcastle for Ekitike if they can't get a deal over the line for Alexander Isak, having made a soft approach for him this afternoon at around £120 million, although it wasn't an official bid. Are you caught up? If you are, we'll get into it. Please do subscribe, like, share, and all that sort of thing. If you're new, you know the drill. But yeah, so basically, a lot has happened, and that's why I'm back on to talk about it. And the situation has undoubtedly changed between Ekitike, Newcastle, and Liverpool. Various people are reporting various different things about whether Liverpool will come back in with a formal bid for Isak. Lots of papers saying 130 million is possible. Others, Sky Sports, have said that they'll move on to Ekitike, having been told by Newcastle that Isak is not for sale. The stance has never changed though, and this hasn't really changed this afternoon. Isak has to make the move. Isak has to make the decision on his future. If Isak intimates that he wants to go, Newcastle's approach may soften because they are very confident, or they have been, that he wants to stay. He hasn't made any suggestion that he wants to go. Obviously, he hasn't signed that new contract. That is a problem down the line for Newcastle, but equally, talks are suggested for this month and they haven't been knocked back. There's no suggestion that Isak doesn't want them or isn't willing to talk about extending his stay at Newcastle with a higher fee. Obviously, I've given my thoughts on that and whether I think he'll do that, and I think the reality is he'll look for some sort of release clause. If he is to sign a contract, the chances of him committing his future blindly to Newcastle from this point of power are very unlikely. That's just a fact. But that doesn't mean that he's going to join Liverpool, and he isn't, crucially, necessarily going to push and force through a move to Liverpool. I think he would quite like the idea of joining Liverpool this season if it was possible, but there's a big difference between that and actually pushing for the move itself. So I think Newcastle are in an incredibly strong position of power. Liverpool have obviously tried to negate that by pushing for Ekitike, and that is a problem. I think Liverpool can offer a lot more to Ekitike than Newcastle can. There's a clearer route to starting up front. They're obviously the Premier League champions. They're a competitor for the Champions League. They're not just playing in it. I think Newcastle do have that sort of development sort of sense about them. So when they go up against a club like Liverpool, and we saw it with João Pedro and Chelsea, he viewed them as more ready to win trophies and have since won the Club World Cup. So it is maybe difficult for Newcastle to go up against Liverpool for Hugo Ekitike, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anything's changed on that regard as well. Newcastle have had a bid rejected. They've had talks with Ekitike's people. As I said on this morning's video, they've flown out to Austria. There's a suggestion that they can come to an agreement with Eintracht Frankfurt. That was certainly the case last night or this morning. But Frankfurt rejecting that bid, there was something that came through, which is basically that maybe they sense another club or other clubs are waiting in the wings to maybe pay more. Could that be Liverpool? We'll have to wait and see on that. And it may be that it is a choice between the two strikers from Newcastle's perspective. There's no way that they're going to sanction Isak from this point, though. I can't see any bid of any money being enough unless Isak makes that move to suggest that he wants to go, and there's no sign that he's going to do that. I certainly haven't heard anything, and I'm confident he will still be at St James's Park next season. But that might mean that they have to give up on Ekitike, or they won't get Ekitike. But my suggestion would be just to ignore the noise, keep pushing. They're ahead in the race for Ekitike at the moment. They've made a play for him. They've had conversations with Frankfurt. They've had conversations with his agents. Is that enough to mean that he would reject Liverpool? That's something that only he knows, and that's something that I think Newcastle should let's see how things play out. If they don't get Ekitike, maybe they move on to other targets. But I think we can all agree that out of the two scenarios, if they keep Isak and lose out on Ekitike, that's much better than the alternative, which is losing Isak. Even if they manage to get Ekitike, I think that's a little bit different this summer to having Ekitike and Isak together and then maybe down the line losing Isak in a more managed way. I think that's a very different scenario. So I think that this one's got some room to play. I still think Newcastle are at the table for Ekitike. I don't think that they should walk away. I don't think they should be bullied out of the play by Liverpool. Liverpool coming in suggests that maybe the dynamic will change, and if they do make a play for Ekitike, it's difficult to see, to be honest, why he would reject that move in favour of joining Newcastle because of the opportunities he would get, you would imagine, at Anfield. There are reports this evening that they haven't been fully convinced by him. Do they want a striker who's ready to go? In which case Julian Alvarez has been mentioned as a possible alternative to Alexander Isak. Victor Osimhen's on the market as well. Ekitike is still a work in progress, and Liverpool have had that with Darwin Núñez. It didn't work. I think Newcastle are in an extremely strong position with Alexander Isak, and I wouldn't give up hope of Hugo Ekitike, even though it's hard to disagree that the situation is now very different than it was even this morning in terms of the chances of Newcastle having both, because if Liverpool make a play, it could be difficult to see how he turns down that move to come to St James's Park. Having said that, these two things are very well entwined in terms of Newcastle's move for Ekitike. It's predicated on the idea of playing with Isak. Ekitike joining is meant to help Isak feel settled and show Newcastle's ambition to him, to hopefully have him stay at the club beyond this season. I think Newcastle's position hasn't really changed as of now. The only way Newcastle's position weakens on Isak is if he decides to leave, and that hasn't been intimated by anyone at this stage. Even if he does, Newcastle still are in an extremely strong position with 3 years in his contract. As much as Liverpool fans might like to think so, this isn't the last summer in terms of when Newcastle can make a good profit on him. His valuation will still be extremely high next summer, even if the worst case scenario comes to pass. Should Newcastle signed Isak to a better contract earlier? That's possible. I mean, there were conversations last summer that were shelved until the end of the season because I think things were hotting up on the pitch in terms of the cup final and then the Champions League race. I think everything needed to be solved at the end of the season. Those plans are still very much in place, so this hasn't really changed anything from Newcastle's perspective. But the Ekitike situation is very much alive as well, and we'll see whether Liverpool make that move. But at the moment, they haven't made any moves, so Newcastle is still very much in the race for Ekitike. They can return with a fresher bid. They're willing to break their transfer record. They're willing to have a conversation about the fee, but we'll see how that progresses in terms of what Liverpool do. At the moment, Alexander Isak is very much a Newcastle United player, and I am very confident he'll be a Newcastle player at the end of the transfer window. Thanks so much for joining me on today's bonus episode. I'm busy in the morning, so this may be in lieu of another episode in the morning. We'll see how that goes in terms of developments. If there's nothing fresh, I'll be back on Thursday to discuss more about Newcastle United's transfer situation. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.